The auctioneer's hammer came down on the Moonstone Ranch. At the exact moment, Rose Dalton's carefully forged deed burned a hole through the leather case, pressed against her ribs. She stood on the telegraph office steps, watching the crowd disperse from the land office across the street. Her heart hammering against her stays, and told herself she had done what was necessary. Her father's name was cleared. The family shame was buried. No one would ever know the witness testimony she had burned 3 months ago, or the claim document she had carefully rewritten in lamplight until her fingers cramped. She had saved them all. She repeated it like a prayer. Then, Sheriff Emmett Thornton stepped into the sunlight below her, trail dust still coating his dark jacket, and looked up at her with eyes that had seen too much to be fooled by prayers. He said, "Miss Dalton." His voice was rough from days of riding, flat with exhaustion, but it carried the weight of a man who did not waste words. "I need to speak with you about your father's case. There is a witness who did not testify. A man named Henry Calloway. Records say he sent a telegraph from this office the week before the trial. I need to see that message." Rose felt the blood drain from her face. She forced her expression into something light, something careless, and said, "Sheriff, I handle dozens of messages every week. I cannot be expected to remember one telegram from months ago." She smiled, the same bright, dismissive smile she used to deflect prying questions at church socials. But her fingers tightened on the document case until the leather creaked. Thornton took one step up, then another. He moved like a man who had spent years closing distance on people who ran. He said, "I am not asking you to remember. I am asking you to check your records." The circuit judge reopens disputed land cases in 2 weeks. If Calloway's testimony exists, it could overturn the Moonstone sale. If it does not exist, I need to know why. Rose's mind raced. The telegram had existed. She had burned it in the stove behind the counter the night before the trial, her hands shaking so badly she had nearly dropped the match. Calloway had been her father's former partner, the one man who knew the original Moonstone claim had irregularities, the one man who could have destroyed everything. His message had been a single line. "Dalton claim is fraudulent. Stop sale. I have proof." She had watched the paper curl and blacken and told herself it was justice. Her father had been a good man driven to desperation by debts and a ruthless banker. The claim might have started crooked, but her family had worked that land, bled for it, nearly died for it. She had corrected a wrong. She had evened the scales. Now this sheriff with his tired eyes and his methodical questions was going to pull the thread that unraveled everything. She said, "I will look, but I doubt I will find anything useful." She kept her voice light, airy, as if his presence was a mild inconvenience rather than a knife at her throat. "Give me until tomorrow." Thornton studied her. His gaze moved over her face with the patience of a man reading tracks in hard ground. He said, "Tomorrow morning. I will be at the boarding house if you find something before then." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture so courteous it felt like an accusation, and turned to walk back down the steps. Rose watched him cross the street toward the boarding house, his shoulders square despite the exhaustion that lined his face, and felt something twist in her chest. He was doing his job. He was trying to be fair, and she was going to lie to him, because the alternative was a noose or a prison cell, and she had not fought this hard to lose everything now. She went inside and locked the door behind her. The telegraph office was narrow and dim, smelling of wood oil and old paper. The key sat silent on the desk. She moved to the filing cabinet in the corner, the one with the broken lock she had never bothered to fix, and pulled out the ledger. Calloway's message was listed in her own handwriting. Date, time, sender, recipient. She had been meticulous, because that was how you survived scrutiny. You kept perfect records everywhere except the one place that mattered. She tore the page out carefully, folded it twice, and tucked it into her pocket. Then, she carried the ledger to the stove and considered burning the whole thing. But that would raise more questions. Instead, she went to her desk, dipped her pen, and began to carefully rewrite the page, omitting the single line that would hang her. She worked until the light failed. When she finally looked up, the street outside was dark, and the saloon 2 doors down was spilling noise into the cool evening air. Her hand ached. Her neck was stiff. She felt hollowed out, scraped clean of everything except the desperate need to survive. She locked the rewritten ledger back in the cabinet, pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders, and stepped outside. Thornton was leaning against the post at the bottom of her steps. He straightened when he saw her, his hat in his hands, and said, "I thought you might work late." Rose nearly dropped her keys. She said, "You startled me, Sheriff." Her voice came out sharper than she intended, brittle with fear she could not quite hide. He said, "I apologize. I wanted to ask you something. Off the record." He turned his hat in his hands, a slow, deliberate motion, and looked at her with an expression she could not read. "Your father's trial. You testified that he had valid claim to the Moonstone. You were certain." Rose felt the ground shift under her feet. She said, "I was. I am. My father was an honest man. He made mistakes, but he did not steal that land." Thornton said, "The banker who foreclosed on him, Samuel Kern, he has a reputation. He has taken a dozen properties in the last 5 years, always just before families could make good on their debts. Always through legal channels. But the timing is convenient. If Calloway's testimony existed, and if it supported your father instead of contradicting him, it would suggest Kern manipulated the sale. It would mean your father was telling the truth." Rose stared at him. Hope and terror tangled in her chest until she could not tell them apart. She said, "Why are you telling me this?" Thornton said, "Because I have been a lawman long enough to know when something does not sit right. Your father lost everything and died 6 months later. You have been working double shifts at this telegraph office, trying to keep your mother and sister fed. Kern bought the Moonstone for 1/3 of its value and resold it last week for 3 times what he paid. That does not sit right with me. If there is evidence that clears your father's name, I want to find it. But I need your help." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the weariness in his eyes that went deeper than a long ride. "I need you to tell me the truth." Rose felt the lie rising in her throat, smooth and practiced, but something in his face stopped her. He was not trying to trap her. He was trying to help her. And she was going to betray that trust, because she had no choice. She said, "I will look through everything again tonight. If there is something, I will find it." Thornton held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded, put his hat back on, and said, "Thank you, Miss Dalton." He walked away into the dark, his footsteps steady on the boardwalk. And Rose stood alone on the steps, feeling like the worst kind of liar. She worked through the night, checking and rechecking her alterations, making sure the ink matched, the handwriting was consistent, the dates aligned. At 2 in the morning, she heard boots on the boardwalk outside and froze, her pen hovering over the page. But the footsteps passed. At 4, she finally allowed herself to sleep, her head pillowed on her arms at the desk, the altered ledger locked away. When dawn light woke her, her neck screamed, and her vision swam. But the evidence was gone. She had erased Henry Calloway from the record. She had buried the last thread that could unravel her carefully constructed safety. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt sick. Thornton arrived at 8, exactly as promised. He knocked twice, polite and patient, and Rose opened the door with the ledger in her hands and a smile that felt like broken glass. She said, "I checked everything, Sheriff. There is no record of a telegram from Henry Calloway. If he sent one, it did not come through this office. Perhaps he used a different telegraph station, or perhaps the message was never sent at all." Thornton took the ledger and paged through it slowly. He ran his finger down the columns, checking dates, and Rose felt every second like a blade against her spine. Finally, he closed the book and handed it back. He said, "You are certain?" Rose said, "I am." Her voice did not shake. She had practiced this. "I keep meticulous records. If Calloway sent a telegram, there would be a trace." Thornton studied her face. He said, "All right. Then I will need to track Calloway down myself. Last known address was a mining camp north of here." He tipped his hat. "Thank you for your time, Miss Dalton." He left, and Rose stood in the doorway, watching him walk toward the livery stable, and felt the weight of what she had done settle into her bones. He was going to ride into the mountains looking for a man who might already be dead, or who might contradict the very story Rose had built to save herself. She should have felt safe. Instead, she felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground to give way. The next 3 days passed in a haze of normal work. She sent telegrams for ranchers and merchants. She smiled at customers. She kept her mother and younger sister fed with the small salary the telegraph company paid. She did not sleep well. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Thornton's face, that weary patience, the way he had looked at her like she mattered, like her word was worth something. She had poisoned that. She had made herself into exactly the kind of person he spent his life tracking down. On the 4th day, a rider came into town at a gallop and went straight to the marshal's office. Rose heard the commotion from the telegraph window and felt her stomach drop. An hour later, Thornton rode back into Silver Gulch with another man, slumped in the saddle beside him, hands tied, face bruised. Rose recognized him. It was one of Kern's hired men, a man named Tolliver, who had a reputation for solving problems with his fists. Thornton hauled him off the horse and marched him into the jail, and the whole town gathered to watch. Rose closed the telegraph office and joined the crowd. She told herself she was just curious. She told herself she needed to know what was happening. But the truth was, she could not stay away. She needed to see Thornton, needed to see if he had found Calloway, needed to know if her carefully constructed lie was about to collapse. The marshal came out onto the jailhouse steps and raised his hands for quiet. He said, "Sheriff Thornton has brought in a suspect in connection with the murder of Henry Calloway." Calloway's body was found 3 days ago in a ravine north of the mining camp. Evidence suggests he was killed to prevent him from testifying about the Moonstone Ranch claim. The crowd erupted. Rose felt the world tilt. Calloway was dead. Someone had killed him, and Thornton thought it was connected to the Moonstone case. Her case. Her forgery. Her lie. She pushed through the crowd and caught Thornton as he came out of the jail. She said, "Sheriff, I need to speak with you." He looked at her, and there was something new in his face. "Suspicion," he said. "Not now, Miss Dalton. I have a murder investigation to run." Rose said, "This involves me. If Calloway was killed because of the Moonstone claim, then someone knows something. Someone is trying to bury the truth." Thornton said, "Yes, and I am going to find out who." He started to move past her, but she caught his arm. His muscles went rigid under her hand, and he looked down at her fingers on his jacket sleeve with an expression that made her let go immediately. She said, "I want to help." She did not know where the words came from, but once they were out, she could not take them back. "If my father's name is tied to this, I need to know the truth," Thornton said. "The truth is dangerous, Miss Dalton. Men have died for it. I suggest you stay out of this." He walked away, his back straight, his hand resting on his gun belt, and Rose stood in the street feeling like she had just lit a fuse she could not extinguish. That night, someone set fire to the telegraph office. Rose woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of her mother screaming. She ran barefoot into the street in her nightgown and saw flames licking up the side of the building, orange and hungry against the black sky. Men were already hauling buckets from the town pump. Thornton was there, his jacket off, his shirt soaked, shouting orders. Rose ran toward the building, thinking of the ledger, the evidence, the proof of what she had done. But Thornton caught her around the waist and hauled her back. He said, "It is gone. Do not be a fool." His arms were iron around her ribs, his chest heaving against her back, and Rose stopped fighting because the heat was a wall she could not pass. They put the fire out an hour before dawn, but the telegraph office was gutted. The desk was ash. The filing cabinet was a twisted ruin. The ledger was gone. Rose stood in the smoking wreckage with her shawl clutched around her shoulders and felt a wild, terrible relief. The evidence was destroyed. No one could prove what she had done. Then, Thornton stepped up beside her, his face soot-streaked and grim, and said, "This was not an accident." Rose said, "How do you know?" Thornton crouched and lifted a piece of scorched wood. He showed her the clean saw marks at one end, the way the boards had been pried loose to let air feed the flames faster. He said, "Someone wanted this place to burn. Someone wanted your records destroyed." He looked up at her, his eyes hard in the pre-dawn light. "What was in those files, Miss Dalton?" Rose said, "Nothing. Just telegraph logs, customer records. Nothing worth killing for." The lie came easily now. She had practiced it so many times it felt like truth. Thornton stood and brushed his hands off. He said, "Samuel Kern owns half this town. If he wanted to bury something, burning your office would be a convenient way to do it. But it also makes you a target. If someone thinks you know something, they might come after you next." Rose felt cold despite the lingering heat from the fire. She said, "I do not know anything." Thornton said, Then why did Tolliver ask about you when I arrested him? He wanted to know if you had talked to me. He wanted to know if you had checked the records. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. You are in danger, Miss Dalton, and I cannot protect you if you do not tell me the truth. Rose looked at him. His face was exhausted, lined with worry and frustration, and she knew he meant it. He wanted to help her. He was trying to save her, and she was lying to him with every breath. She said, I have told you the truth. There was no telegram from Calloway. I do not know what Tolliver thinks I know, but I do not have it. Thornton held her gaze. Then he nodded slowly and said, All right. But you are not staying here. The boarding house has a spare room. You and your family will stay there until this is settled. No arguments. Rose wanted to argue anyway, wanted to insist she could take care of herself. But the truth was, she was terrified. Someone had burned her office. Someone had killed Calloway. And if they thought she knew too much, they would come for her next. She said, Thank you, Sheriff. Thornton said, Call me Emmett. If I am going to keep you alive, we should at least be on a first-name basis. His mouth twitched, almost a smile, and Rose felt something crack open in her chest. Something warm and dangerous that had no place in this mess she had made. They moved into the boarding house that morning. Rose's mother fussed, and her younger sister cried. But Emmett arranged it all with quiet efficiency, paying for the rooms himself when Rose tried to protest. He said, Consider it part of the investigation. You are a witness. Keeping you safe is my job. But the way he looked at her when he said it made her think it was more than a job. The circuit judge was due in 10 days. The town was restless, full of rumors. People said Kern had ordered the fire. People said Tolliver had killed Calloway on Kern's orders. People said the Moonstone claim had always been dirty, and the Daltons were just as crooked as Kern. Rose heard the whispers and felt them like stones against her skin. She had wanted to clear her father's name, and instead, she had painted a target on her back. Emmett spent his days questioning witnesses and tracking down leads. He barely slept. Rose saw him come in late at night, saw the way he moved like every muscle ached, saw the grim set of his jaw that said he was not finding what he needed. On the 5th night, he knocked on her door and said, I need your help. Rose opened the door. She was still dressed, though it was past midnight. She had not been able to sleep. She said, What do you need? Emmett said, Kern keeps his business records in a safe at his house. If there is proof he ordered Calloway killed, or proof he manipulated the Moonstone sale, it will be there. But I do not have enough evidence for a warrant. I need someone who can get in quietly and look. Rose stared at him. She said, You are asking me to break into his house. Emmett said, I am asking you to help me find the truth. If we wait for the judge, Kern will bury everything. Tolliver will hang for murder, but Kern will walk free, and your father's name will stay dirty. This is the only way. Rose felt her pulse hammering in her throat. She said, If I get caught, I will hang. Emmett said, You will not get caught. I will be with you. He stepped closer, his voice low and steady. I will keep you safe, Rose. I promise. It was the first time he had used her given name. It sounded different in his voice, softer, more real. she said. Why are you doing this? You could lose your badge. You could be charged as an accomplice. Emmett said. Because it is the right thing to do. And because I do not like watching good people get crushed by men like Kern. He reached out and touched her hand. Just a brief brush of his fingers against hers, but it sent heat up her arm. Your father did not deserve what happened to him. You do not deserve to live in fear. Let me help you. Rose looked at his hand on hers, at the calluses on his palms, the faint scars across his knuckles. She thought about the forged deed hidden in her mother's trunk. She thought about the telegram she had burned. She thought about the lie she had built her safety on. And she thought about the way Emmett looked at her, like she was someone worth saving. She said, "All right. I will help you." They went that night. Kern's house sat at the edge of town, a 2-story frame structure with a wide porch and iron fencing. Emmett led Rose through the back alley, moving quietly, his hand on her elbow to steady her over the uneven ground. The night was cool and moonless. Dogs barked in the distance. Rose's heart hammered so hard, she thought it would give them away. Emmett picked the lock on the back door with a thin piece of metal he produced from his pocket. The door swung open, with barely a sound. He said, "Stay close. Do not touch anything unless I tell you to." They moved through the dark kitchen, past a parlor that smelled of cigars and whiskey, and into a study lined with bookshelves. Emmett closed the door behind them and lit a small shielded lantern. The safe sat in the corner, black iron and heavy. He knelt beside it and worked the dial with practiced patience. Rose stood by the door, listening for footsteps, her breath shallow in her chest. The safe clicked open. Emmett pulled out a stack of ledgers and papers and spread them on the desk. He leafed through quickly, his eyes scanning columns of numbers, dates, names. Rose watched him, watched the concentration on his face, the way his jaw tightened when he found something. He said, "Here, look at this." Rose leaned over his shoulder. The paper was a contract, dated 2 weeks before her father's trial. It was an agreement between Kern and a man named Abner Wade, promising Wade a percentage of the Moonstone resale in exchange for ensuring certain testimony did not reach the court. Rose felt her stomach turn. She said, Wade was the clerk who handled the trial records. He worked for the judge. Emmett said, he made sure Calloway's telegram never reached the judge. He buried it. And Kern paid him for it. He looked up at her, his face tight with anger. Your father was telling the truth. Kern manipulated the whole trial. Rose should have felt vindicated. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the walls closing in. If Emmett found the telegram she had destroyed, if he traced the missing record back to her, this contract would not save her. It would just prove that multiple people had conspired to bury the truth, and she was one of them. She said, we need to take this to the judge. Emmett said, not yet. If we take this now, Kern will claim it is forged. We need Calloway's testimony. We need the original telegram. He looked at her. You are sure there was no record of it? Rose felt the lie stick in her throat. She said, I am sure. But there was no force behind it, no conviction, and she saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Emmett said, Rose, if there is something you are not telling me, now is the time. I cannot protect you, if I do not know what I am up against? Rose opened her mouth. The truth was right there, balanced on her tongue. She could tell him everything. She could confess the forgery, the burned telegram, the rewritten ledger. She could throw herself on his mercy and hope he understood. But fear closed her throat. Fear of the noose. Fear of her mother and sister losing everything. Fear of the way he would look at her when he knew what she had done. She said, "There is nothing. I have told you everything." Emmett held her gaze. Then he nodded and turned back to the papers. He said, "All right. We take this contract. It is enough to start." He folded it and slipped it inside his jacket. Then he closed the safe, checked the room to make sure they had left no trace, and led her back through the dark house. They were halfway across the yard when the dog started barking. A light flared in an upstairs window. Emmett grabbed Rose's hand and ran. They bolted through the alley, Rose's skirts tangling around her legs, her breath tearing in her chest. Behind them, she heard a man's voice shouting. A door slammed. Footsteps pounded on the porch. Emmett dragged her around a corner and into the narrow space between two buildings. He pressed her against the wall, his body shielding hers, his hand over her mouth. She could feel his heart hammering against her shoulder. She could smell sweat and dust and the faint scent of saddle leather. He was warm and solid and absolutely focused. She felt safer than she had any right to feel. The footsteps passed. Voices called back and forth, confused, searching. Emmett waited until the noise faded, then lowered his hand from her mouth. He said, "Are you all right?" Rose nodded. She could not speak. Her whole body was shaking, adrenaline and fear, and something else she did not want to name. Emmett brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his fingers gentle, and said, "You did well. You are braver than you know." Rose wanted to laugh. She wanted to cry. She was not brave. She was a liar and a forger. And she was falling for a man who would arrest her the moment he learned the truth. She said, "We should go." They made it back to the boarding house without being seen. Emmett walked her to her door and said, "Get some sleep. Tomorrow I take this contract to the marshal and we start building the case against Kern." He smiled, a rare expression that softened his tired face, and added, "We are going to clear your father's name, Rose. I promise you that." Rose went inside and closed the door and leaned against it, her eyes shut, her chest aching. He was trying to save her, and she was going to destroy him. The next morning, Kern came to the boarding house. He arrived with 2 hired men, both armed, and demanded to speak with Emmett. Rose heard the commotion from her room and came downstairs to find Emmett standing on the porch, his hand on his gun, his face hard as stone. Kern stood in the street, impeccably dressed, his silver hair gleaming in the morning sun. He said, "Sheriff Thornton, I understand you have been making accusations against me. I am here to set the record straight." Emmett said, "I have evidence that you manipulated the Moonstone trial. I have evidence that you paid a court clerk to bury testimony. And I have a witness who can connect you to Henry Calloway's murder." Kern smiled. It was a cold, reptilian expression. He said, "You have a piece of paper that proves nothing. Wade is already on a train to California. Tolliver will not talk. And Miss Dalton, your so-called witness, has no credibility. Her father was a liar and a fraud. She is the same. He looked past Emmett to where Rose stood in the doorway. Tell him, Miss Dalton. Tell the good sheriff about the telegram you destroyed. Tell him about the forged claim you used to clear your father's name. Rose felt the ground drop out from under her. The world narrowed to Kern's mocking face, and Emmett's sudden, terrible stillness. She said, I do not know what you are talking about. Kern said, No? Then perhaps you can explain why my clerk saw you burning papers in your telegraph office the night before the trial. Or why your handwriting appears on a claim document that your father never signed. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and held it up. I had an expert examine the Moonstone deed. The signature is a forgery. Your forgery, Miss Dalton. Emmett turned slowly. His face was empty, wiped clean of expression, but his eyes were dark and unreadable. He said, Rose, is this true? Rose felt her throat close. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to scream that Kern was lying, that he had set her up, that none of it was real. But the truth was written on her face, in her silence, in the way her hands shook. She said, Emmett, I can explain. Emmett said, Did you forge the claim? Rose said, Yes. Emmett said, Did you destroy Calloway's telegram? Rose said, Yes. Her voice broke. But I did it to protect my family. Kern manipulated everything. He drove my father into debt. He foreclosed on us illegally. I just evened the scales. Emmett looked at her like she was a stranger. He said, You lied to me. You sent me into the mountains looking for evidence that did not exist. You let me risk my badge, my life, my reputation, to help you. And the whole time you were guilty. Rose said, I am not guilty. I did what I had to do. What Kern did was worse. What Kern did destroyed my family. Emmett said, What Kern did is a crime I can prove with evidence and law. What you did is a crime I have to arrest you for. He stepped toward her, his hand moving to the handcuffs on his belt, and Rose felt panic claw up her spine. She said, Emmett, please, do not do this. If you arrest me, Kern wins. He will walk free. My family will lose everything. Emmett said, If I do not arrest you, I am an accomplice. I lose my badge. I lose my honor. I lose everything I have built my life on. His voice was quiet, but there was pain in it, raw and deep. You should have trusted me, Rose. You should have told me the truth. We could have found another way. Rose said, There was no other way. You do not understand. She reached for him, but he stepped back, and the distance between them felt like a chasm. I did what I had to do to survive. Just like you have done things you are not proud of to survive. Do not pretend you are better than me. Emmett said, I have never lied to someone who trusted me. He took another step back, his face hard again, shuddered. Rose Dalton, you are under arrest for forgery and destruction of court evidence. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt and held them out. Rose backed toward the door. She said, I will not go with you. Emmett said, You do not have a choice. Rose turned and ran. She bolted through the boarding house, out the back door into the alley. Behind her, she heard Emmett shout her name, heard his boots pounding after her. But she did not stop. She ran through the back streets, her lungs burning, her vision blurring with tears. She had lost everything. She had lost her safety, her home, her future. She had lost Emmett. And she did not know how to survive the fall. She made it to the old mission at the edge of town before her legs gave out. The mission had been abandoned for years, its adobe walls crumbling, its roof open to the sky. Rose collapsed in the shade of the bell tower, her chest heaving, her mind racing. She could not go back. She could not face Emmett, could not face the judge, could not face the noose or the prison cell waiting for her. She had gambled everything on a lie, and the lie had finally broken. She sat there until the sun climbed high and the heat became unbearable. Then she heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, and looked up to see Emmett standing in the doorway. He had not drawn his gun. He just stood there, looking at her with an expression that was equal parts anger and heartbreak. He said, "You cannot run, Rose. There is nowhere to go." Rose said, "I know. But I could not just stand there and let you put those cuffs on me. I could not let Kern win." Emmett stepped inside and sat down on a broken bench across from her. He took off his hat and set it beside him. He said, "Tell me everything. From the beginning. No more lies." Rose looked at him. She wanted to lie again. She wanted to protect herself, to salvage something from this wreckage. But there was nothing left to protect. She said, "My father was not a thief, but he was desperate. He borrowed money from Kern to expand the ranch, and when he could not pay it back, Kern started looking for a way to take the land." The original Moonstone claim had a flaw, a boundary dispute from years back that had never been fully resolved. Kern found it. He pressured my father, threatened foreclosure, and my father tried to fix the claim. He did not forge anything. He just tried to clarify the boundaries. But Kern used it against him. He brought in Wade to make sure the trial went his way. He paid Calloway to testify that the claim was fraudulent. Calloway agreed, but then he had a crisis of conscience. He sent the telegram saying he had been paid to lie, saying he had proof Kern manipulated the trial. I saw that telegram, and I knew if it reached the judge, Kern would just bury it another way. So I destroyed it. I rewrote the claim to remove the boundary flaw. I testified that my father was honest, and I thought I had saved us. She wiped her eyes, her voice shaking. But Calloway is dead. Kern is still free, and my father's name is still ruined. I did all of this for nothing. Emmett was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You did it because you loved your family. You did it because you had no power and no options." I understand that, Rose, but it does not make it right. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. "If I let you go, I am saying the law does not matter. I am saying people with good intentions can break the rules whenever they want. I am saying there is no difference between you and Kern." Rose said, "There is a difference. Kern did it for greed. I did it for survival." Emmett said, "And how do I prove that to a judge? How do I convince a jury that your forgery is noble, but his is corrupt?" The law does not care about intentions, Rose. It cares about evidence. And the evidence says You committed a crime, Rose said. Then arrest me. Take me in. Let me hang for trying to protect my family. But do not pretend you are doing the right thing. You are just too afraid to break the rules. Emmett looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was so raw it hurt to see. He said, You think I am afraid? I have spent my whole life enforcing rules I did not write, protecting people who do not want my help, risking my life for a system that is rigged in favor of men like Kern. I know the law is broken, Rose. I know it fails more people than it saves. But it is all we have. If I let you walk away, I am admitting the law means nothing. And if the law means nothing, then I mean nothing. Everything I have done, every sacrifice I have made, it is all for nothing. His voice cracked. Do not ask me to throw that away. Rose felt tears streaming down her face. She said, I am not asking you to throw it away. I am asking you to choose me. I am asking you to believe that some things are more important than the law. She stood and crossed to him, knelt in front of him, took his hands. I know I lied to you. I know I broke your trust. But I am asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to help me. One more time. Please, Emmett. Emmett looked down at their joined hands. He said, If I help you, I lose everything. My badge, my reputation, maybe my freedom. Rose said, If you do not help me, I lose everything. My life, my family, you. She squeezed his hands. I know it is not fair. I know I do not deserve your help. But I am asking anyway. Emmett closed his eyes. For a long moment, he did not move. Then he pulled his hands free, stood, and walked to the doorway. He stood with his back to her, looking out at the bright, dusty town, and said, There is a stagecoach leaving for the territorial capital in 2 hours. If someone were on that stage, they could appeal directly to the territorial governor. They could present evidence of Kern's corruption and ask for a full investigation. The governor has the authority to overturn local verdicts and issue pardons. It is a long shot, but it is legal. Rose said, You want me to run? Emmett turned to face her. He said, I want you to fight. Take the contract we found in Kern's safe. Take your testimony. Take everything you know about what he did to your family. Make your case to someone who has the power to stop him. It is the only way that does not end with you in a cell or me losing my badge. Rose said, What about you? Kern will come after you the moment I leave. He will say you helped me escape. Emmett said, Let him try. I will tell the marshal I arrested you and you escaped custody. It will not be a lie. I brought you here. I will leave the door open. You will be gone before I notice. He smiled, bitter and tired. I have lost prisoners before. It happens. Rose stood. She crossed to him and took his face in her hands. She said, Why are you doing this? Emmett said, Because you were right. Some things are more important than the law, and I would rather lose my badge than lose you. He kissed her, hard and desperate, his hands in her hair, and Rose kissed him back with everything she had. With all the fear and hope and love she had been too afraid to name. When they broke apart, he said, Go. Now, before I change my mind. Rose ran. The stagecoach ride took 3 days. Rose spent them in a haze of fear and exhaustion. clutching the contract against her chest, rehearsing her testimony in her head. When she reached the territorial capital, she went straight to the governor's office and demanded an audience. She was turned away twice. On the third try, she told the secretary she had evidence of judicial corruption involving a murder and a land fraud scheme, and the secretary finally let her in. The governor was a gray-haired man with shrewd eyes and a reputation for impatience. He listened to her story without interrupting. He read the contract. He asked pointed questions. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "This is explosive, Miss Dalton. If what you say is true, Samuel Kern has corrupted half the legal system in Silver Gulch. But you are also admitting to forgery and destruction of evidence. Why should I believe you are telling the truth now?" Rose said, "Because I have nothing left to lose. Kern already owns my town. If you do not stop him, he will do the same thing to a dozen other families. I am guilty of forgery. I am not denying that. But I did it because the law failed me. If you want to uphold the law, you need to fix the system that made people like me desperate enough to break it." The governor studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "I will open an investigation. I will send a federal marshal to Silver Gulch with the authority to arrest Kern and anyone else involved in this conspiracy. If your testimony holds up, I will issue a pardon for your forgery conviction on the grounds of coercion and systemic failure. But if you are lying to me, Miss Dalton, I will see you hanged. Do we understand each other?" Rose said, "Yes, sir." The governor sent her back to Silver Gulch with a federal marshal and a writ of investigation. They arrived 6 days after she had fled, and the town was in chaos. Kern had accused Emmett of helping Rose escape. The marshal had suspended Emmett pending an inquiry. Tolliver had been released on a technicality. Rose's mother and sister had been evicted from the boarding house. Everything had fallen apart. Rose went straight to the marshal's office and presented the writ. The federal marshal arrested Kern on the spot. He arrested Wade, who had been hiding in a hotel room 2 towns over. He arrested Tolliver for Calloway's murder. And he reinstated Emmett with a formal commendation for uncovering the conspiracy. Emmett found Rose outside the jailhouse an hour later. He looked thinner, more exhausted, but there was relief in his eyes. He said, "You did it." Rose said, "We did it." She wanted to touch him, to kiss him, to fall into his arms. But there were too many people watching, too many eyes on them. "I am sorry I ran. I am sorry I put you through this." Emmett said, "You did what you had to do. I am just glad you made it back." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "We need to talk about what happens next." Rose said, "What do you mean?" Emmett said, "The governor pardoned your forgery conviction, but Kern's lawyers are going to fight this. There will be a trial. You will have to testify. It could take months. And even if we win, people in this town are going to remember what you did. They are going to whisper. They are going to judge you." Rose said, "Let them. I am not afraid anymore." Emmett smiled. He said, "Good. Because I am not letting you go through this alone. If you are staying in Silver Gulch, so am I. If you are leaving, I am coming with you. Whatever happens, we face it together." Rose felt something warm and fierce unfold in her chest. She said, You would give up your badge for me? Emmett said, I already did once. I would do it again. He took her hand, right there in the middle of the street, and laced his fingers through hers. You are worth more than a badge, Rose Dalton. You are worth everything. The trial took 4 weeks. Rose testified for 2 days, laying out every detail of Kern's manipulation. The forged testimony, the buried evidence, the murder of Henry Calloway. Emmett testified. The federal marshal testified. Wade, facing a prison sentence, turned on Kern and confirmed everything. Kern's lawyers fought hard, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and came back with a guilty verdict on all counts. Kern was sentenced to 20 years. Tolliver was sentenced to hang for Calloway's murder. Wade got 10 years for corruption. When it was over, Rose stood on the courthouse steps and felt the weight lift from her shoulders. Her father's name was cleared. The Moonstone Ranch was returned to her family. Kern was finished. She had won. Emmett found her there, standing in the late afternoon sun, and said, What are you thinking? Rose said, I am thinking I need to rebuild the telegraph office. I am thinking my mother and sister need a stable home. I am thinking I want to stay in Silver Gulch and prove to this town that I am not my father's mistakes. She looked at him. What are you thinking? Emmett said, I am thinking I want to marry you. He said it plainly, without ceremony, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I am thinking I want to wake up next to you every morning and fight with you about who makes the coffee. I am thinking I want to build a life with you, right here, in this stubborn, dusty, infuriating town. He took her hands. What do you think, Rose? Rose felt tears prick her eyes, but she was smiling. She said, I think you are insane. I think I am a terrible risk. I think people will talk and judge and make your life difficult. Emmett said, Let them. I do not care what people think. I care about you. He pulled her closer. So, is that a yes? Rose said, Yes. Yes. It is a yes. She kissed him, right there on the courthouse steps with half the town watching, and she did not care. She had spent so long hiding, so long afraid of being seen, that kissing Emmett in broad daylight felt like the bravest thing she had ever done. They married 3 weeks later in the small church at the center of town. Rose wore a simple ivory dress her mother had sewn, and Emmett wore his best suit, the one he saved for funerals and weddings. The church was full. Rose's mother cried through the entire ceremony. Her younger sister threw rice so enthusiastically she hit the preacher in the face. The whole town turned out, some to celebrate, some to gossip. But they all came. After the ceremony, there was a reception at the boarding house. Someone brought a fiddle. Someone else brought whiskey. The dancing went on until midnight, and Rose danced with Emmett until her feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. When they finally slipped away, the stars were bright overhead and the town was quiet. Emmett carried her across the threshold of the small house he had rented on the edge of town, a 2-room frame structure with a porch and a view of the hills. He set her down in the front room and said, Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton. Rose looked around at the simple furniture, the clean floors, the lamp already burning on the table. She said, You did this? Emmett said, I wanted it to be ready. I wanted you to have a place that felt like yours. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder. I know it is not much, but we will make it better. We will make it ours." Rose leaned back against him and closed her eyes. She said, "It is perfect. You are perfect." She turned in his arms and kissed him, slow and deep, and felt the last of her fear dissolve. She was safe. She was loved. She was home. They went to bed that night in each other's arms, the windows open to the cool night air, the sound of crickets drifting in from the darkness. Emmett held her close and said, "I love you, Rose. I will spend the rest of my life proving it." Rose said, "You already have." She kissed him again, and they did not speak after that. The months that followed were the hardest and the happiest of Rose's life. She rebuilt the telegraph office with money from the Moonstone sale. Emmett continued his work as sheriff, earning the respect of the town through steady, patient justice. They faced whispers and judgment, but they faced it together. Slowly, the town began to see them not as a scandal, but as a partnership. Rose's mother and sister moved into a small house near the ranch. The Moonstone began producing again under new management. Life returned to a cautious, hopeful rhythm. One evening, 6 months after the wedding, Rose was closing the telegraph office when Emmett rode up with a package. He said, "This came for you." It was forwarded from the territorial capital. Rose opened it and found a letter from the governor. It was a formal commendation for her role in exposing Kern's corruption, along with a note that said, "You did more than clear your father's name, Miss Dalton. You restored faith in the system. Thank you." Rose handed the letter to Emmett. She said, "Do you think he is right? Do you think we actually changed anything?" Emmett read the letter and handed it back. He said, "I think we held one corrupt man accountable. I think we gave one family justice. That is not enough, but it is something. And it is more than we had before." He pulled her close. "We will keep fighting, Rose. One case at a time. One injustice at a time. Together." Rose said, "Together." She kissed him, and they stood there in the fading light, holding each other, and she felt the truth of it settle into her bones. They had fought for this. They had earned this. And whatever came next, they would face it together. A year after the trial, Rose discovered she was pregnant. She told Emmett one night after dinner, her hands shaking, her voice uncertain. She said, "I do not know if I am ready. I do not know if I will be a good mother. I spent so long just trying to survive. I never thought about what comes after." Emmett took her hands and said, "You will be a wonderful mother. You are strong. You are brave. You fought for your family when no one else would. You will do the same for our child." He kissed her forehead. "And you will not be doing it alone. I will be right here." Rose said, "You promise?" Emmett said, "I promise. For the rest of my life, I am right here." Their daughter was born in the spring, a small, fierce thing with dark hair, and her mother's determined expression. They named her Clara, after Rose's grandmother. Emmett held her for the first time with tears in his eyes, and Rose watched him and felt something break open in her chest. Something warm and overwhelming, and absolutely terrifying. She had spent so long afraid of being seen, afraid of being vulnerable, that holding her daughter felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. But Emmett was there, his hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. he said. We will figure it out. One day at a time. And they did. The years passed. Clara grew into a bright, stubborn child who climbed trees and asked too many questions and drove Emmett to distraction with her fearlessness. Rose ran the telegraph office and became a respected voice in the community. Emmett served as sheriff for another decade before retiring to help Rose manage the growing telegraph network. They added 2 more children, a son named Thomas and another daughter named Anne. The house on the edge of town grew crowded and loud and full of life. One evening, when Clara was 10 and already too clever for her own good, she asked Rose, "Mama, is it true you were arrested once?" Rose looked at Emmett, who was sitting by the fire whittling a wooden horse for Thomas. He raised an eyebrow, leaving the answer to her. Rose said, "Yes, it is true. I made a mistake. I broke the law because I thought it was the only way to protect our family." Clara said, "But you were pardoned, right? That means you were forgiven?" Rose said, "It means the governor decided my crime was understandable given the circumstances, but it does not mean I was right." There is a difference. Clara frowned. She said, "If you had not done it, would we have the ranch? Would we be here?" Rose said, "I do not know. Maybe not. Maybe we would have found another way. Or maybe we would have lost everything. I cannot change what I did, Clara. I can only teach you to make better choices than I did." Clara said, "But you and Papa caught the bad man. You fixed it." Rose said, "We did our best. But fixing things is complicated. It is not always clear who the bad men are. Sometimes good people do bad things. Sometimes the law is wrong. The important thing is to keep trying, to keep fighting for what is right, even when it is hard, even when you are scared." Clara thought about that. Then she said, "I think you are brave, Mama. I think you did what you had to do, and I am glad you did, because otherwise I would not be here." Rose felt tears prick her eyes. She pulled Clara into her lap and held her close. She said, "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know." Emmett set down his whittling and came over to sit beside them. He said, "Your mother is the bravest person I know. She fought for her family when the whole world was against her. She risked everything to do what was right. And she taught me that sometimes the law is not enough. Sometimes you have to fight for justice, even when the law fails you." He kissed Rose's temple. "I am proud of her every single day." Clara said, "I want to be brave like Mama when I grow up." Emmett said, "Then you will be. Because you have her blood in your veins. And you have both of us to teach you." He wrapped his arms around them both. "We are a family. We face things together. That is what makes us strong." Rose grew older. Her hair turned silver. Her hands grew gnarled from years of telegraph work. But she never lost the fierce determination that had carried her through those early desperate years. She watched her children grow, watched them face their own struggles, watched them make their own mistakes. She taught them to fight for what was right. She taught them to own their choices. She taught them that survival was not enough. You had to live with honor. You had to leave the world a little better than you found it. Emmett aged beside her. His hair went white. His joints stiffened. But his eyes stayed sharp, and his love stayed steady. On their 30th anniversary, he took her to the old mission where he had first offered her a way out. They stood in the crumbling adobe, now overtaken by wildflowers, and he said, "Do you remember what I told you that day?" Rose said, "You told me to run. You told me to fight." Emmett said, "I told you that you were worth saving. And I was right." He took her hands. "You saved yourself, Rose. You saved your family. You saved me. I have spent 30 years loving you, and it has never been enough. I will spend the rest of my life trying to show you what you mean to me." Rose said, "You already have, every single day." She kissed him, soft and slow, and said, "I love you, Emmett Thornton. I loved you when I was terrified and desperate. I loved you when I hated myself. I loved you when I thought I did not deserve to be loved. And I love you now, more than ever." Emmett said, "Then we are even. Because I have loved you since the day I saw you standing on those telegraph office steps, lying to my face and daring me to call you on it." He smiled. "You were magnificent. You still are." They stayed there until the sun set, holding each other in the ruins of the place that had nearly been their ending, and instead had been their beginning. When they finally walked back to town, hand in hand, the stars were bright overhead, and the night was cool and full of promise. They had built a life together. They had built a family. They had built something worth fighting for. And they would keep fighting as long as they had breath in their bodies, because that was what love looked like. That was what survival looked like. That was what it meant to be seen, and known, and chosen anyway. On Rose's 70th birthday, the whole town gathered at the refurbished Moonstone Ranch for a celebration. Her children and grandchildren were there. Emmett, now 80 and moving slowly but still sharp-eyed, stood beside her on the porch and watched the crowd. Clara, now a telegraph operator herself, gave a speech about her mother's bravery and resilience. Thomas, a lawyer, talked about justice and the importance of fighting corruption. Anne, a teacher, spoke about the value of truth and the cost of lies. Rose listened to them and felt a deep, bone-deep satisfaction. She had done it. She had survived. She had built something lasting. When the speeches were done, and the cake was eaten, and the dancing started, Emmett pulled her aside and said, "Do you have any regrets?" Rose thought about it. She thought about the telegram she had burned. She thought about the forged claim. She thought about the lies she had told, and the fears she had lived with for so long. She said, "I regret that I did not trust you sooner. I regret that I thought I had to do everything alone, but I do not regret fighting for my family. I do not regret surviving. And I do not regret loving you." Emmett said, "Then we have lived a good life." He kissed her forehead. "A very good life." They danced that night, under the stars. The same stars that had watched them fight and fall and rise again. And when the music finally stopped and the guests went home, they stood on the porch of the Moonstone Ranch, the place that had nearly destroyed them and instead had saved them. And they held each other in the cool night air. Rose rested her head on Emmett's chest and listened to his heartbeat, steady and strong, and thought about all the years they had fought to be here. All the fear, all the hope, all the love. It had been worth it. Every single moment, every single choice, every single risk. It had been worth it. And when she finally closed her eyes, Safe in his arms, she felt no fear. She felt no regret. She felt only the deep, abiding peace of a woman who had fought for her life and won.